Okay, something a little bit different now. A few people in year 11 and in year 10 had said that one of the big things that kind of they feel holds them back in exams, like mock exams or even the real exam, is exam technique and structure. So what I want to do is in this video, and I'm going to do one literally as soon as I finish this one, I'm going to do another one for another type of 16 marker. In this video, I want to talk about very quickly, I want to talk about the First World War 16 markers, because that's one of the questions that obviously year 10 you've just done yours, and a few of you were like, oh, I don't understand this, I don't get it. And obviously year 11 you guys have done these before and you've done really well at them, but obviously it's been a while since you've done one. So I want to go through the First World War 16 mark questions, just a few basics, nothing groundbreaking, just the basics, kind of reminding you of the things that you need to do, because obviously year 11, you've got mocks coming up. Year 10, you've got exams coming up at the end of January as well. So hopefully this will be of some use to you. Right, as I said, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, because you've already got all this stuff that I'm going to go through with you now, is in your books, and remember in the textbooks, the textbook goes through how to answer the questions as well. So it's all there, it's all up on Firefly as well. So don't just rely on this video, look back at the stuff you've done in your book as well. But First World War 16 mark questions. Here's an example question for starters. Okay, but look this way, I can't read it. So, all of you have done this question. Year 10, you've literally just done this question. And year 11, you did it last year when you were in year 10 as well. So you've done this question already. So you should recognize it. So it's an example 16 mark question. Extract C suggests that the main reason for deadlock on the Western Front was the tactics of the commanders on both sides. How far do you agree with this interpretation? Use extract C, sources A and B, and your own knowledge to explain your answer. Right, breaking this down. Let's keep it really simple. Breaking this down. This question is asking, essentially, it's asking, how much do you agree with extract C? Extract C says that the main reason why there was deadlock on the Western Front was the tactics of the commanders. So, how much do you agree with that? Now, some of you might think, yeah, I agree with that completely. That's my view. Some of you might go, no, I completely disagree with that. Others might be a bit more on the fence. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what your view is. That's the first most important thing. There's not a right or wrong argument for this question at all. But I'll come back to that in a bit. So first of all, you need to think, right, how much do I agree with that statement, with the extract? Okay? So that's what the question's asking you to do. And as it says down here, use extract C, source A and source B and your own knowledge to explain your answer. So, I'll go into, so the first thing you need to do is, as I say, you need to decide how much do you agree with that. You need to work out what your argument is. If you agree with it more than you disagree with it, great. Think about why and get those ideas in your head and, maybe even jot them down at the top of the paper. But then also think about, well, what other reasons were there for deadlock? Now, as it says at the bottom of the question, use extract C, source A and source B and your own knowledge. Of course, you've got to use your own knowledge. You've got to bring in what you know. So, we're talking about the Western Front. So clearly you'd bring in things that you know about from what we've looked at on the Western Front. So we've looked at loads of battles. We've looked in detail at the Battle of the Somme and at the Battle of Passchendaele. But we've also looked at other smaller battles or less significant battles in the First World War that took place on the Western Front. Neuve-Chapelle, Arras, the Nivelle Offensive, the Battle of Messines. We've looked at all those in a little bit of detail. You've all got stuff in your books about those. So you bring that in. Don't just rely on the sources. If you just rely on the sources, you're going to limit your mark. So bring in your own knowledge. Do bring in at least some of your own knowledge. But going back to those sources, obviously, here are the sources from that question. You've got extract C down here at the bottom, which is obviously the extract from the question, and then you've got source A and source B. So, as I said before, you need to think about how much do you agree with that. If you agree with it more, great. If you disagree with it more, also great. Think about what the other factors are. Extract C is clearly banging on about how terrible the commanders were, or why the commanders are to blame for the deadlock. Now, you should already, before you even look at the sources, if you looked at that question, you should already, if you're a good student, you should already be able to work out, right, okay, was it just the commanders? No, it wasn't. There was this reason and there was that reason. There are other reasons for the deadlock. You should be thinking about that already. But if, for whatever reason, you can't think of any, as it says in the question, use sources A and B. Sources A and B will always give you a bit of a helping hand. There'll be something in sources A and B that you can use as an alternative view. So, as I say, you've all seen this before, so you all know what I'm on about here. But for example, here in source A, the last line here of source A, bodies were strung out on the barbed wire. So clearly, one thing that you could, and probably should, talk about in that answer is barbed wire. It wasn't just the tactics of the commanders, there were things like barbed wire. There's references to the machine gun as well, so you could talk about that. Bringing in, again, some of your own knowledge, you might talk about weather and conditions, thinking about the Battle of Passchendaele and how actually at first the Battle of Passchendaele was actually quite a success. The first day of the Battle of Passchendaele was a real success for the Allies, and then it started to rain, and that, completely, derailed all the plans there. So, loads of different things that you could talk about, and as I say, sources A and B will always give you, not that much help, but will give you a bit of a nudge towards something else you can talk about. You must look at, and I'll talk about this in literally a couple of seconds, you must look at both sides. Don't just do an answer where you're saying, it was all the commander's fault, because that will only get you, again, about half marks, if that. Or vice versa, don't just do an answer talking about, no, it was all the machine gun, it was all the machine gun, it was all the machine gun. Again, you're not looking at both sides. So, thinking on those lines, here's how to structure it. So, first of all, and I would argue, probably most important, you must have an introduction. Remember that. Don't just jump straight in there. Have an introduction. In your introduction, you need to do two things, really. You must do these two things. First of all, most importantly, you need to say what your argument is. So if you agree that the tactics of the commanders were the main reason for deadlock, say why. Or say in your introduction. Your introduction should make it clear to me, or whoever's marking it, should make it clear what your argument is. Okay? You should also, in your introduction, make it clear what else you're going to talk about. So obviously you're going to talk about the tactics of the commanders, but what other things are you going to talk about in your answer? I.e. machine gun or barbed wire or whatever. So your introduction needs to say what your argument is and what you're going to focus on. Okay? And that is really important because quite a few of you, I'm talking particularly to year 10 here, but year 11, you're guilty of this too sometimes as well. Your answer shouldn't be a surprise. I shouldn't get to the conclusion and be, surprised by what your argument is. I should know from the word go what your argument is. It shouldn't be a surprise. Tell me straight away what your thoughts are, what your argument is. But yeah, going back to that. Introduction. What's your argument? What you're going to focus on? Then 1 to 2 paragraphs. It's up to you. Doesn't really matter. You could do 1 big paragraph or 2 smaller paragraphs. Totally up to you. Really doesn't matter. Talking about the interpretation. So in this case, talking about the tactics of the commanders. So talking about the thing from the question. Again, using sources and own knowledge. So bringing that in. Then 1 to 2 paragraphs talking about other factors. Yeah. So again, machine gun, barbed wire, things like that. As some examples. Again, using sources and own knowledge. And then a conclusion, just rounding up your overall argument. You all know how to do a conclusion. You're all pretty good at doing conclusions as well. So that's how to structure it. Introduction, and then, as I say, 1 to 2 paragraphs, doesn't matter, on the thing from the question, the interpretation from the question. And then 1 to 2 paragraphs on, alternative factors, whatever they may be, and then a conclusion. So a few things here that I want to talk about before I move on. Obviously, sources. You need to use the sources. Now, you don't need to. Year 10 were getting really het up about this when you guys did your one the other week. You don't need to repeatedly use the sources. As long as you've referred to, and by referred to, I mean quoted from. Remember, you got to quote from the sources, put them in little speech marks and quote. do please make sure you quote. It loses you so many marks if you don't quote from the sources. As long as you've quoted from each of the sources once in your answer, that's fine. That's fine. You can do more than one quote from each source if you want to. No law against that. Knock yourself out if you want to. But make sure you've got at least one quote from each source. Okay? Somewhere in the answer. Okay, so it doesn't have to be kind of evenly spread out. You might have one paragraph where you've got, two of the sources in, and then another paragraph where you've got another one in. Doesn't matter, but you do need to make sure that you use and quote from all three sources. But don't just get het up on using the sources. Do make sure you bring in some of your own knowledge. Do bring in your own knowledge. Again, the better answers, the year 10s who've just done that question, the better answers were the ones who didn't just talk about the Battle of the Somme, because obviously those sources are all about the Battle of the Somme. The better year 10 answers were the ones who then brought in their knowledge of Passchendaele or Neuve-Chapelle or Messines or Nivelle Offensive or whatever it was. So they were the better answers. Do make sure you bring in your own knowledge. So that's kind of the key stuff there that you need to be aware of. Just make sure, as I said, the really, really important things to remember, saying what your argument is in the introduction, and keep linking back to it, making sure that you use your own knowledge, that you quote from all three sources, and that your argument kind of flows all the way through. Don't change your argument. Don't start the paragraph. Don't start the introduction saying, I think it was the tactics of the commanders, and then by the conclusion you go, I think it wasn't. So do make sure you stick to your argument. You'd be amazed how many people do that. They kind of start arguing X and they end up arguing Y, and obviously that loses them a lot of marks. So make sure that it flows all the way through. So one final thing I would recommend to everybody is, for these questions, not just for these questions, for any question involving a source or sources, I would take a highlighter or a pair of highlighters into the exam with you, because that exam paper, that question paper, it's yours. Okay, you can write on the exam paper and highlight it and underline it and do whatever. So, thinking about like the First World War 8 markers where you're comparing sources and things like that. Take a highlighter in with you, because for starters, it'll save you if you think, oh, that's a great quote, I'm going to use that in my answer. And then you start writing your answer. Saves you having to go back and go, oh no, where was that quote? If you've highlighted it or underlined it, then you can find it really easily. Oh, right, there it is, brilliant, and you can copy it across. So I do that as well. Make sure that you take a highlighter in, or as I said, if you forget a highlighter, you can write on this exam paper. Year 10 and 11, I'm talking to both of you here. In the mocks and the real exams, you can do it. It doesn't matter. So you can be underlining there. But as I say, those are some of the key things to remember about the First World War 16 markers. They're the more complicated of the 16 markers. Year 11 will know what I'm talking about here, because there's more to do. You have to use the sources, and you have to use your own knowledge, and you have to argue this, that, and the other. But they're not as complicated as you may think. Obviously, both classes, year 10 and year 11, you've got perfect examples to look at, 16 examples to look at. There are some examples in the textbook, and there's that example answer up on Firefly as well, and it's also in the First World War exam technique revision pack that you were given before Christmas. So just remember those key facts. You'll be okay. They're not as complicated as you first think. There's a lot of panic and a lot of things to do with these questions, but you shouldn't panic. They're really, really straightforward. As long as you go in, you explain what your argument is, you look at both sides of the argument, you look at all three sources and bring them in, you bring in plenty of your own knowledge, then you're good to go. You'll be absolutely fine. So that's the First World War 16 markers. I'm going to stop this video, upload it, and then do another one looking at the 16 markers for Germany and civil rights. Obviously, it's the same technique for that, which is good news. So I'm going to do another video on that in just a couple of minutes. As always, any suggestions or requests for future videos, just pop a comment below and I'll have a look at them and see if I can get them uploaded soon. But keep up the revision, take care, and see you soon. Bye-bye.